They called me crazy. For 7 years, every time I told the truth, that my stepfather had murdered my mother, stolen my inheritance, and locked me in a psychiatric hospital to cover his crimes, doctors nodded sympathetically and increased my medication. Every time I protested that I was sane, they wrote "lacks insight into condition" in my chart. Every time I demanded to see a lawyer, they explained that my conservator, Dr. Gregory Ashford, had determined legal consultation would be detrimental to my treatment. The irony was perfect. The man who'd imprisoned me was also the man legally empowered to keep me imprisoned, and the system designed to protect vulnerable people had become the weapon he used to destroy me. But they made one mistake. They let me keep the piano bench in the recreation room, Gregory's gift, a gesture to show the courts he was a caring stepfather supporting my therapeutic interests. And inside that bench, hidden beneath sheet music for Chopin and Debussy, I documented every single day of my imprisonment, every incriminating word Gregory let slip during his visits, every piece of evidence that would eventually prove I was the sanest person in that building. My name is Isabelle Thornton. I'm 34 years old, and I spent 7 years of my life locked in Riverside Psychiatric Hospital for a psychotic break I never had, committed by a man I'd trusted as a father, while he systematically stole $8 million that was rightfully mine. But I should start at the beginning, when I still believed Gregory Ashford was one of the good people. I met Gregory when I was 14 years old. My mother, Margaret Thornton, had been widowed when I was 8. My father died in a car accident, leaving us the real estate development company he'd built from nothing, and enough money to be comfortable but not wealthy. My mother grew the business over 6 years, transforming comfortable into genuinely prosperous, until by 2003 we lived in a Pasadena estate, and I attended a private arts academy where I studied classical piano with the kind of instructors who'd performed at Carnegie Hall. Gregory came into our lives at a charity gala. He was a psychiatrist, charismatic and cultured, who collected art and attended symphony performances and talked about Chopin with the kind of knowledge that made my 14-year-old pianist's heart sing. He was interested in my mother, yes, but he was also interested in me, in my music, my ambitions, my dreams of performing professionally. He asked questions about my practice routines. He came to my recitals. He brought me recordings of legendary pianists and books about music theory. When he and my mother married 6 months later, I was genuinely happy. I'd lost my father at 8. Having Gregory felt like getting a second chance at having someone who understood me. For 13 years, he played the role perfectly. Supportive stepfather, devoted husband, respected psychiatrist with a successful practice treating executives and professionals. He attended my college graduation from USC's Thornton School of Music. He was in the audience at my first professional performance at Walt Disney Concert Hall. He helped my mother manage her business, offering financial advice that seemed sound, taking some of the stress off her shoulders. I trusted him completely, which is why I didn't see it coming when he started killing her. It began in late 2015. My mother, 56 years old and healthy, started experiencing strange symptoms: dizziness, headaches, memory problems. She'd forget meetings, lose track of conversations mid-sentence, complain of feeling disconnected from her body. "It's stress," Gregory said, his voice heavy with professional concern. "Your mother's been working too hard. The business, the properties, the constant pressure. I've prescribed something to help. Blood pressure medication, just to regulate things while she learns to slow down." I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was a doctor. He loved her. And my mother did work too hard, driving herself relentlessly to maintain the empire my father had started, and she'd expanded. But she kept getting worse. The dizziness became vertigo. The headaches became migraines. She started having moments where she couldn't remember my name, where she looked at me with confusion in her eyes like I was a stranger. "Should we see a specialist?" I asked Gregory in January 2016, my voice tight with fear. "A neurologist, maybe?" "I've consulted with colleagues," he assured me, his hand on my shoulder in that paternal way I'd grown to trust. "They agree it's likely stress-induced hypertension. We're monitoring her closely. She's in good hands, Isabelle." She died on March 15, 2016. Brain aneurysm. Sudden, catastrophic, irreversible. She collapsed in the kitchen while making coffee, and by the time the ambulance arrived, she was gone. I was 27 years old, and I'd lost my mother. My grief was oceanic, drowning, absolute. Gregory grieved too, or seemed to, the devoted husband destroyed by loss, leaning on me for support while I leaned on him, two people bound by shared sorrow. The estate was worth $8.3 million, properties my mother had developed, investment accounts she'd carefully managed, the house in Pasadena, her jewelry collection, everything split equally in her will. Half to me, her only child, half to Gregory, her husband of 13 years. "We'll manage this together," Gregory said at the reading of the will, his eyes red-rimmed and sincere. "Your mother would want us to support each other. This is a partnership, Isabelle. We're family." I believed him. Even when he suggested we consolidate the assets under a joint management structure for efficiency. Even when he recommended I focus on my music career while he handled the complex financial details. Even when he had me sign papers I didn't fully understand, trusting that my stepfather had my best interests at heart. 2 weeks after the funeral, I started noticing Gregory's behavior changing. He was distracted, distant. He took phone calls in private. He started asking strange questions about my daily routines, my mental state, whether I'd been feeling anxious or confused. "You've been through trauma," he said one evening in late March. "Losing your mother so suddenly. It's normal to feel unstable. If you need someone to talk to, professionally I mean, I can recommend colleagues." "I'm sad," I said. "Not unstable, there's a difference." His expression shifted, just for a moment. Something cold beneath the concerned facade. "Of course. I just want to make sure you're taking care of yourself." 3 days later, he told our friends I'd had a breakdown. That I'd been found in my mother's closet, talking to her clothes, that I'd accused him of poisoning her, that I'd tried to hurt myself. None of it was true. But when the police showed up at my door with a psychiatric hold order, when they escorted me to Riverside Psychiatric Hospital for evaluation, when I protested that I was fine, that Gregory was lying, they heard exactly what he'd told them they'd hear. A delusional young woman in crisis. The hearing was a formality. Gregory testified as both my stepfather and as a licensed psychiatrist. He presented fabricated medical records showing a history of erratic behavior I'd never exhibited. He described episodes of self-harm I'd never committed. He spoke about my paranoid delusions that he was responsible for my mother's death, painting my very real suspicions as evidence of psychosis. "Your Honor," he said, his voice breaking with perfectly performed anguish, "I love Isabelle like my own daughter. But she's a danger to herself. She needs long-term intensive treatment. As her family and as a medical professional, I'm begging the court to grant involuntary commitment and allow me to serve as her conservator so I can ensure she gets the help she desperately needs." The judge, looking at a grieving psychiatrist trying to save his disturbed stepdaughter, granted both. 90-day commitment, renewable indefinitely. Conservatorship over my person and estate. Gregory Ashford given complete control over my life, my assets, my freedom. I was 27 years old, and I'd just been erased. The first 6 months at Riverside were hell in ways I hadn't imagined hell could be. I protested constantly, demanding lawyers, insisting I was sane, begging staff to listen to me. Every protest was documented as lack of insight into her psychotic condition. Every demand for legal representation was noted as paranoid ideation regarding persecution. Every attempt to explain that Gregory had fabricated everything was written up as persistent delusion regarding stepfather, refuses to accept reality of mental illness. They medicated me aggressively. Risperdal first, an antipsychotic that made my thoughts feel like they were moving through molasses. Every word I tried to speak, requiring Herculean effort to push through the fog. My hands developed a tremor within 2 weeks, a fine shake that made holding a pencil difficult and playing piano impossible. When I complained about the tremors, they added Cogentin for the side effects, which gave me dry mouth so severe I woke up at night feeling like I'd swallowed sand. Then Depakote, a mood stabilizer, because my agitation suggested bipolar disorder. The Depakote made me gain 20 pounds in 6 weeks, my body swelling with fluid retention and metabolic changes. I'd been 118 pounds when I entered Riverside, a dancer's build from years of disciplined practice and performance preparation. By August 2016, I was 142 pounds, my face puffy and unfamiliar in the bathroom mirror, my clothes tight and uncomfortable. Sleep aids because I wasn't resting adequately. Trazodone that left me groggy and confused until noon, stumbling through morning group therapy sessions in a haze of pharmaceutical hangover. The combination turned me into someone I didn't recognize. My sharp pianist's mind, the mind that could memorize complex Rachmaninoff concertos, that could analyze musical theory and historical context while simultaneously perfecting technical execution, was reduced to something slow and stupid. Thoughts arriving seconds late, words escaping me mid-sentence. And every time I tried to explain that the medications were making me worse, not better, they increased the dosages, because resistance to treatment was itself a symptom. Insight required accepting that you were sick. Refusing medication proved you needed it. The routine at Riverside was designed to strip away identity. Wake at 6 a.m. to fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and staff calling meds. Breakfast in 30. Shuffle to the medication window where a nurse watched you swallow pills and then checked your mouth to ensure you'd actually taken them. Breakfast in a cafeteria that smelled like industrial cleaner and overcooked eggs. The food flavorless and heavy, designed for institutional efficiency rather than nourishment. Group therapy at 9 a.m. in a room with inspirational posters about living in the present and accepting yourself that felt like mockery when you were trapped against your will. The therapist, a kind but ineffective woman named Sharon, would lead discussions about coping with mental illness, while I sat silently, knowing that any attempt to claim I wasn't mentally ill would be documented as denial. Art therapy, music therapy, occupational therapy, all of it theoretically helpful, actually just ways to fill the endless hours while keeping patients compliant and manageable. My roommate for the first 3 months was a woman named Patricia, who believed she was receiving messages from the television. She'd wake up at 2 a.m., shouting responses to the voices she heard, and I'd lie in my narrow hospital bed, listening to staff trying to calm her down, wondering how long before I actually went crazy from being surrounded by genuine mental illness while being powerless to leave. Gregory visited twice a month, punctually, always bringing flowers or books or some small gift that made him look like the devoted stepfather to any staff member watching. He'd sit across from me in the visiting room, a space designed to look comforting with soft furniture and muted colors, but that still felt like a cage, and he'd ask about my treatment with perfectly calibrated concern. "How are you feeling, Isabelle? Are you taking your medications? Dr. Stevens says you've been resistant to treatment. That concerns me." I wanted to scream. I wanted to attack him, to claw at his lying face, to force him to admit what he'd done. But the visiting room had cameras, staff watching. Any violence would extend my commitment indefinitely, prove I was dangerous, validate everything Gregory claimed. So I sat with my medicated hands trembling in my lap and tried to explain that I was innocent, that he'd framed me, that this was all about stealing my inheritance. His expression would shift to pity. "Sweetheart, you're not well. These paranoid thoughts about me, about money, this is exactly what we're trying to treat. I know it feels real to you, but it's not. Your mother's death was natural. The estate is being properly managed. You're here because you need help." And sometimes when he thought the medication had made me too foggy to notice, he'd slip. Little comments about property sales or financial decisions that revealed he was liquidating assets I should have had control over if I were actually incompetent rather than imprisoned. "The Waverly property sold last week," he mentioned casually during a September 2016 visit, examining his nails with studied disinterest. "Below market value, unfortunately, but the buyer was motivated. Quick close, one less thing to manage. The Waverly property, my mother's first development project, a commercial building she'd nurtured from vacant lot to profitable rental space, worth at minimum $1.2 million based on recent comparable sales in the area. He'd sold it. My inheritance, liquidated without my consent, at below market value because he wanted quick cash rather than proper value. I was so medicated I could barely process what he was saying in the moment. But later, back in my room, I wrote it down on a scrap of paper I'd torn from a magazine. Sept 2016, Gregory sold Waverly property below market, quick close. Admitted during visit, check property records. That scrap of paper was the first fragment of what would eventually become 42 notebooks of evidence. By October, I'd started to understand something crucial. Fighting was exactly what Gregory needed me to do. Every protest confirmed his narrative that I was unstable. Every accusation of theft proved I was delusional. Every demand to be released demonstrated I lacked insight into my condition. The more I fought, the longer he could keep me locked away. So in late October 2016, I did something that felt like surrender, but was actually strategy. I stopped fighting. Not because I gave up, because I realized compliance was the only path to freedom. Gregory had weaponized my resistance. Every objection became evidence. So I'd remove the evidence. I'd become the model patient. I'd make them believe I was getting better while I quietly, methodically documented his crimes. I started taking medications without argument. When the nurse held out the pill cup, I took it, swallowed, opened my mouth for inspection. I stopped complaining about side effects, even though the tremors were getting worse and my thoughts still felt wrapped in cotton. I attended therapy sessions and participated, not in ways that made me seem delusional. I never confessed to delusions I didn't have, but in ways that made me seem engaged with treatment. I talked about my grief over my mother's death. I discussed adjusting to life without her. I used the language they wanted to hear about processing trauma and working through loss. I participated in group activities without complaint. Art therapy, where I painted generic landscapes that suggested calm, emotional state rather than imprisonment and rage. Music therapy, where I played simple pieces that didn't require the technical precision my medicated hands had lost. And slowly, cautiously, they started to believe I was improving. They called it accepting treatment. They called it progress. They reduced my medication slightly, pleased that I was finally engaging with my recovery, instead of resisting the therapeutic process. The irony was exquisite. The moment I started pretending to be what they thought I should be, they started treating me like I might actually become sane. When I'd been telling the truth, that I'd always been sane, they'd called it delusion. When I performed sanity for them, they called it healing. And while they congratulated themselves on my improvement, I started documenting everything Gregory had stolen. The piano bench was Gregory's idea. Music therapy, he explained to my treatment team in November 2016. Isabelle's identity is built around piano. Allowing her to practice might help her reconnect with herself. They moved an upright piano into the recreation room. Gregory bought me a matching piano bench with storage, a beautiful walnut piece with a hinged seat that opened to reveal space for sheet music. He thought he was being magnanimous. He had no idea he'd just given me the perfect hiding place. The piano bench was Gregory's idea, suggested during a November 2016 treatment team meeting I wasn't present for but heard about later from a sympathetic nurse. Music therapy, he'd explained to my psychiatrist, Dr. Stevens, and the social worker assigned to my case. Isabelle's entire identity is built around piano performance. She'd been preparing for a Carnegie Hall debut when her mother died. Allowing her to practice might help her reconnect with herself, provide therapeutic structure during recovery. It was brilliant manipulation, positioning himself as the caring stepfather supporting my therapeutic interests, earning points with staff, making himself look good. They moved an upright piano into the recreation room, a decent instrument that had probably been donated by someone's estate. Gregory bought me a matching walnut piano bench with storage, the kind with a hinged seat that opened to reveal compartments meant for sheet music. He thought he was being magnanimous, demonstrating his devotion to my well-being. He had no idea he'd just given me the perfect hiding place for evidence. I started keeping journals immediately, but carefully. Not obvious diaries that would be found during routine room inspections or questioned during therapy sessions. I tore pages from composition notebooks available in the art therapy room, writing in small, neat handwriting that maximized how much information I could fit on each page. I hid the pages beneath Chopin nocturnes and Debussy preludes in the piano bench, organized chronologically so I could find specific entries if needed. November 12, 2016. Gregory visit today. Mentioned selling mother's investment portfolio. Said market favorable for liquidation. Professional language, like he'd consulted with brokers. Asked which investments. He listed 3 mutual funds. Total value approx $400, based on mother's last statement I saw before commitment. Said he'd moved assets to more secure instruments. Translation, his personal accounts. Stealing everything. Must find way to prove it. January 8, 2017. Overheard Dr. Stevens and Dr. Martinez in hallway outside rec room. Dr. Martinez said my commitment papers seem unusual for acute psychotic episode. Too much medical jargon, descriptions too vague. Stevens defended paperwork, said, Dr. Ashford is credible psychiatrist. We trust his professional judgment. Martinez said professional courtesy shouldn't override procedural review. She's skeptical. Note, watched for Martinez over next weeks. She was transferred to adolescent unit late January. Coincidence? Or silenced for questioning? March 15, 2017. 1 year since mother died. Gregory visited, brought flowers, played grieving husband. Seemed relaxed though, almost cheerful. Mentioned buying a boat. 27-foot sailboat, perfect for weekend trips. A boat. He's spending my inheritance on recreational toys while I'm locked in psychiatric prison. Asked what boat cost. He said $85,000, but worth it for mental health. The irony is suffocating. He destroyed my mental health, stole my money, bought boat with my money, justifies it as self-care. Sociopathy documented in real time. I documented everything. Gregory's visits, where he let financial details slip. Conversations with staff, where I carefully, strategically shared fragments of truth that wouldn't sound paranoid. Observations about which employees seemed skeptical of my diagnosis and which ones were true believers in Gregory's narrative. By 2018, I had 12 notebooks filled. 18 months of documentation. Patterns emerging of systematic asset liquidation. Gregory had sold the Waverly commercial property, the Colorado Avenue residential development, and the Pasadena office building my mother had purchased as investment property. Total, $3.1 million in real estate liquidated at 25 to 30% below market value because Gregory wanted fast cash rather than proper value. The investment accounts had been drained. Mother's retirement accounts, her stock portfolio, the municipal bonds she'd bought as stable income investments, all liquidated, supposedly reinvested in secure instruments, but actually transferred to accounts in Gregory's name only. I documented each transaction as Gregory mentioned them, cross-referencing with information I could access through the hospital library's computer. Public property records showed sales dates and prices. I noted discrepancies between proper market value and Gregory's actual sales prices. May 22, 2018, hospital library computer session. Searched LA County property records. Waverly property sold Sep 2016 for $980K. Comparable properties in same neighborhood selling for 1.3 to 1.4 members. Gregory undersold by minimum $320K. Why? Quick cash versus proper value. Established pattern, he's liquidating entire estate as fast as possible, accepting below market prices to convert assets to liquid cash he controls. This isn't estate management. This is theft speedrun. September 2019, Dr. Rodriguez assigned to my case. 3rd session today. She reviewed my file, frowned at timeline, asked why no competency reviews in 2+ years. I explained Gregory, as conservator, determines when I'm ready for review. Requesting review is itself considered evidence of lack of insight. She looked disturbed, said the law requires periodic review regardless of conservator opinion. Quoted specific statute. She's actually read the law. First doctor who seems to care about legality versus institutional convenience. Potential ally? Must be careful, patient. Plant seeds, don't push. Dr. Amelia Rodriguez became my focus. She was 32, relatively new to Riverside, with idealism still intact and genuine concern for patient rights. I worked on her carefully over months, never pushing too hard, never sounding paranoid, just gradually sharing fragments that didn't quite fit Gregory's narrative. Dr. Ashford mentioned during last visit that he sold another property. I said during a June 2019 session, my voice neutral, factual. The commercial building on Colorado Avenue. My mother developed that specifically as legacy income. Stable tenants, long-term leases, meant to generate passive revenue for decades. Selling it seems counterproductive to estate preservation. Dr. Rodriguez made a note. He's managing your assets as conservator. perhaps he determined liquidation was financially prudent. Selling a property worth $1.8 million for $1.2 million because a buyer offered cash within 30 days seems less financially prudent and more deliberately underselling to access cash quickly. But what do I know? I'm just the crazy person. She looked up sharply. Those are specific numbers. Public record. Anyone can access property sales data. I use the library computer sometimes. Researching my own estate isn't delusional. It's being informed about my assets. And you're claiming Dr. Ashford undersold this property? I'm stating factual data about sale price versus comparable market values. You can interpret that however you want. I watched doubt grow in her eyes. Small seeds, carefully planted, given time to germinate. By 2020, I had 28 notebooks. 3 years of evidence, detailed documentation of every financial transaction Gregory had mentioned, every procedural irregularity in my detention, every staff member who'd questioned my diagnosis and then mysteriously been transferred or resigned. I befriended Sarah Chen that year. Sarah was a hospital social worker, 38 years old, who coordinated patient resources and advocacy. She wasn't a psychiatrist bound by the same institutional loyalty, and she actually seemed to care about patient rights as civil rights rather than abstract concepts. Can patients access legal resources? I asked during a rec room activity session where Sarah was supervising. Like legal aid attorneys? Of course, every patient has right to legal consultation. It's constitutionally protected, even if their conservator says it would be detrimental to treatment. Her expression sharpened. The conservator's opinion about treatment doesn't override your constitutional rights to legal access. Why? Have you been denied legal consultation? I handed her a document I'd been carrying for 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment. A list. 17 times over 3 years I'd formally requested to speak with a legal aid attorney. 17 times denied, with notes from Gregory explaining that legal consultation would agitate her delusions about persecution and impede treatment progress by reinforcing paranoid ideation. Sarah's face went pale as she read. This isn't legal. You have absolute right to legal consultation regardless of treatment concerns. I know, I researched it using the library computer, but telling staff I have rights just makes them think I'm combative. Insisting on legal access is documented as litigious behavior consistent with paranoid thought patterns. Who believes the crazy person when she says the system is violating her rights? Sarah didn't say she believed me. That would have been too dangerous for her career. Could have gotten her fired like Dr. Martinez had been transferred. But she helped me in secret. She smuggled in printouts about patient rights laws. She explained competency hearing procedures. She gave me contact information for Pacific Justice Coalition, a legal aid organization specializing in psychiatric patient advocacy. And most importantly, she helped me request my mother's medical records through a patient advocacy form. Reviewing deceased family medical history was considered therapeutically appropriate for grief processing, completely legitimate, defensible requests that Gregory couldn't block without looking suspicious. What we found in those records made my blood run cold and Dr. Rodriguez's skepticism transform into horrified certainty. My mother's prescribed blood pressure medication, 10 milligrams daily of lisinopril. Her actual blood levels at time of death per autopsy toxicology, consistent with 40 to 50 milligrams daily dosing. Someone had been giving her 4 to 5 times her prescribed dose. High blood pressure medication given at excessive levels can cause severe hypertension, vascular stress, and yes, brain aneurysms. Gregory had murdered her, slowly, methodically, using his medical knowledge to make it look natural. And when I'd started to suspect, when I'd mentioned to him that I thought something was wrong with her medication, he'd known I was getting too close to the truth. So he'd made me disappear. We need to request a competency hearing, Dr. Rodriguez said in January 2024, her voice tight with controlled anger. Immediately. Isabelle, what's been done to you is unconscionable. You should never have been committed. You certainly should never have been held for 7 years. Will they believe you? I asked. Gregory's a psychiatrist, respected, established. You're newer to the field. He'll say you've been manipulated by a delusional patient. Then we'll let the evidence speak. Your journals, the financial records, your mother's toxicology. We'll present it all. The competency hearing was scheduled for March 2024, 7 years and 2 weeks after I'd been committed. I walked into that courtroom in clothes Sarah had bought me, civilian clothes, not hospital-issued, with Dr. Rodriguez beside me, and 7 years of hidden journals in bankers' boxes wheeled in my legal aid attorneys. Gregory sat across the courtroom with his own lawyers, his expression confident. Why wouldn't he be? I was the crazy stepdaughter. He was the devoted psychiatrist who'd tried so hard to help me. The system had believed him for 7 years. Why would it stop now? Then my attorney started presenting evidence. The journals, 42 notebooks, meticulously dated, cross-referenced with public property records showing Gregory had sold $5.2 million in real estate assets at 30% below market value within 18 months of gaining conservatorship. Investment accounts liquidated, cash transferred to accounts in his name only. The financial forensics expert who testified that the liquidation pattern was consistent with deliberate asset stripping rather than prudent estate management. Dr. Rodriguez's testimony about the irregularities in my commitment papers. Medical terminology that didn't match actual psychiatric documentation, behavioral descriptions that were too vague and generic, the suspicious lack of any competency reviews in 7 years. The toxicology report on my mother, with a forensic pathologist explaining that her blood pressure medication levels were incompatible with prescribed dosage and highly suspicious for deliberate overdose. Gregory's lawyers objected constantly. They argued I was manipulative, that I'd fabricated evidence, that my apparent coherence was typical of high-functioning delusional patients. Then the judge asked me to speak. I stood. My hands were shaking, from medication withdrawal, from 7 years of trauma, from the weight of this moment. But I spoke clearly. Your Honor, my stepfather murdered my mother by poisoning her with excessive blood pressure medication. When I began to suspect, he used his psychiatric credentials to have me committed, fabricating evidence of mental illness. He then served as my conservator and stole my entire inheritance while I was locked away, unable to defend myself. For 7 years, every time I told the truth, I was medicated into silence. Every time I demanded my legal rights, I was told I lacked the capacity to exercise them. I am not delusional. I have never been delusional. I am a sane woman who was imprisoned by a man who knew exactly how to exploit the psychiatric system to commit the perfect crime. I'm asking you to look at the evidence. Not his credentials, not his professional reputation, but the documented facts. And then I'm asking you to let me go. The judge reviewed the evidence for 3 hours. When she returned to the bench, her face was granite. Miss Thornton, I find that you have been wrongfully committed. Your conservatorship is hereby terminated, effective immediately. You are free to go. Gregory's face went white. Furthermore, the judge continued, her voice sharp as a blade, I am referring this matter to the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. Dr. Ashford, you will surrender your passport and remain available for questioning. I walked out of Riverside Psychiatric Hospital on March 28, 2024. 7 years and 13 days after I'd been forced inside. I was 34 years old, and I was free. The criminal trial began in September 2024. The DA charged Gregory with first-degree murder for my mother's death, fraud, false imprisonment, conspiracy, perjury, and elder abuse. The trial lasted 9 weeks and made national headlines. 60 Minutes called it one of the most disturbing cases of institutional abuse in recent memory. The prosecutor described Gregory as a predator who weaponized his psychiatric expertise to commit murder and theft, then silenced the only witness by locking her away and making the world believe she was insane. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, my journals, toxicology reports, testimony from 3 other Riverside patients whose commitments were also found to be questionable. My case had opened an investigation that freed them too. But the most powerful moment came during the 8th week of trial, when the prosecutor asked if I could demonstrate what Gregory had stolen from me. They brought a piano into the courtroom, a Steinway Grand, brought from a local concert hall specifically for this moment. The bailiffs wheeled it to the front of the courtroom, positioning it where everyone could see. Judge, jury, gallery packed with journalists and spectators who'd been following the trial obsessively. I sat at the bench. The leather was butter soft, expensive, Nothing like the worn vinyl of Riverside's recreation room piano bench that had hidden my journals for 7 years. My hands hovered over the keys, and I could feel everyone watching. Gregory's cold stare from the defense table, Dr. Rodriguez's supportive presence in the gallery, the jury's 12 faces filled with anticipation. My hands were shaking. 7 years without real practice. 7 years of medication-induced tremors that had never fully resolved even after I'd been released and the drugs cleared from my system. 7 years of the muscle memory and precision that had once made me a professional, that had once earned me a slot at Carnegie Hall at age 26. I'd been preparing for that Carnegie Hall debut when my mother died. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most technically demanding pieces in the classical repertoire. I'd practiced 8 hours a day, perfecting every trill, every dynamic shift, every moment of impossible beauty. The concert had been scheduled for April 2016. My mother died in March. Gregory had me committed in April. The concert happened without me. Now, in this courtroom, I couldn't play Rachmaninoff. My hands no longer had the precision, the medication damage, the years without practice, the muscle atrophy. All of it meant that the technical brilliance I'd once possessed was gone. But I could play Chopin. I chose Nocturne in E-flat major, Opus 9, No. 2. The piece I'd performed at my mother's funeral, my fingers moving through the notes while tears streamed down my face, the last time I'd played piano before Riverside. It was beautiful and melancholy, and not too technically demanding, something I could manage even with tremoring hands. I started playing. The first notes were rough. My fingers stumbled over the opening phrase, the melody that should have been smooth and lyrical coming out halting and uncertain. The tremor made sustained notes waver. My right hand couldn't execute the flowing ornamental runs with the clarity they deserved. What should have been crystalline decorative phrases came out muddy, imprecise. But I kept playing. Because the piece isn't about technical perfection. It's about emotion, about grief, about finding beauty in sorrow, and I had 7 years of sorrow to pour into those keys. The middle section, where the melody builds and intensifies, my hands shook so badly I had to slow the tempo. What should have been played andante, at a walking pace, became largo, almost dirge-like. But the slower pace gave each note more weight, more meaning. Every imperfect phrase was a testament to what had been taken from me. I could see the jury. 3 of them had tears streaming down their faces. One woman, a juror in her 50s who'd been taking meticulous notes throughout the trial, covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes squeezed shut. A male juror in the back row looked away, his jaw clenched tight like he was fighting to maintain composure. The judge, Judge Patricia Morrison, who'd maintained perfect judicial neutrality throughout 9 weeks of testimony, blinked rapidly, her expression carefully controlled, but her eyes suspiciously bright. Even some of the journalists in the gallery were crying. I could hear someone stifling a sob, the sound echoing in the otherwise silent courtroom. Gregory sat at the defense table, with his expensive attorneys, his face a mask of studied indifference. But I saw his jaw tick, I saw his hands clench, because he knew. He knew that this moment, this imperfect, trembling, damaged performance was more damning than any forensic evidence or financial records. This was what he'd stolen. Not just $8 million, not just 7 years of my freedom. But this, my ability to create beauty, to express emotion through music, to be the person I'd spent 27 years becoming. He'd taken my hands and broken them, not physically but through pharmaceutical force and enforced neglect. I reached the final section, where the melody returns transformed, tinged with acceptance and peace. My fingers found the closing phrases, the resolution to E-flat major that should sound like coming home. It didn't sound like it should. The notes were imperfect. The timing was off. The dynamics lacked the control I'd once had. But it was honest. It was real. It was 7 years of imprisonment, distilled into 4 minutes of imperfect music. When I played the final chord, letting it resonate in the silent courtroom, my hands were shaking so badly I had to pull them into my lap. I sat at the piano bench with my head bowed, tears dripping onto the expensive Steinway keys, and I heard someone in the gallery openly sobbing. The prosecutor approached me gently. "Miss Thornton, can you tell the jury what we just heard?" I looked up, my vision blurred with tears. "You heard what's left. what I used to be able to do, and what Dr. Ashford's 7 years of imprisonment took from me. I was preparing for Carnegie Hall. I had a career. I had hands that could play Rachmaninoff, Liszt, the most technically demanding pieces in classical repertoire. Now I can barely manage Chopin. The medications he kept me on, the antipsychotics, the mood stabilizers, all of it supposedly for my mental health, gave me permanent tremors. 7 years without practice destroyed my muscle memory. I will never perform professionally again. He didn't just steal my money, he stole who I was. Multiple jurors were crying openly now. Even the court reporter looked affected. Her fingers paused over her stenotype machine. Gregory's defense attorney stood to object, something about theatrical displays not being evidence. But Judge Morrison cut him off with a look that could have frozen fire. The witness is answering a direct question from the prosecution. Objection overruled. Continue. The prosecutor nodded. Thank you, Miss Thornton. No further questions. Gregory's defense claimed I was still delusional, that I'd fabricated everything out of bitterness about my commitment. The jury deliberated for 9 hours, guilty on all counts. Judge Patricia Morrison sentenced him to 18 years in state prison. Dr. Ashford, you betrayed every oath you took as a physician. You murdered your wife. You imprisoned an innocent woman for 7 years. You stole her inheritance, her freedom, her career, her youth. The court can only hope that 18 years provides a fraction of the justice you denied Miss Thornton. His medical license was permanently revoked. All his assets were seized. He was ordered to pay $6.2 million in restitution, the recovered inheritance plus damages. The scandal destroyed Riverside Psychiatric Hospital's reputation. 3 administrators resigned. The state launched an investigation into involuntary commitment procedures. My case became the catalyst for Isabelle's Law, requiring independent psychiatric review for all commitments lasting more than 2 years. I received $10 million total in restitution and damages. More than my original inheritance, though no amount of money could return 7 years of my life. But I didn't let those years be meaningless. I founded Freedom Through Truth Foundation, an advocacy organization for wrongfully committed individuals. We investigate suspicious conservatorships, provide legal resources for patients fighting commitment, and train psychiatrists on ethical standards and red flags for financial exploitation. I testified before the California State Legislature. I worked with the Free Britney movement on conservatorship reform. I wrote a memoir, The Piano Bench Papers, 7 Years of Secret Truth, that became a bestseller and advocacy tool. I can't return to performing piano professionally. My hands lost too much. The precision is gone, the muscle memory degraded by years of forced medication and lack of practice. But I teach piano therapy to trauma survivors, helping them find healing through music, the way music helped me survive. Gregory Ashford sits in state prison. His colleagues have disowned him. His reputation is destroyed. And every day he spends locked away, unable to access his freedom, unable to control his own life, is a tiny fraction of what he took from me. I was 27 when he locked me away. I'm 34 now. 7 years stolen. 7 years of journals hidden in a piano bench, documenting the truth one day at a time, building the case that would eventually free me. They called me crazy when I said my stepfather was a murderer and a thief. I was right, and I spent 7 years proving it. The sanest person in the room was the one they locked away. But sanity, patience, and meticulous documentation are powerful weapons. Even when the system traps you, even when the world refuses to believe you, truth finds a way out. It just takes time. And I had nothing but time, so I used every single day.